Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Mondays with Mendy. Today we're going to talk about freedom, and the reason we're talking about freedom is obvious. We are about to celebrate the holiday of Passover, Pesach, which begins in just 2 weeks' time. The most celebrated Jewish holiday on the calendar. In fact, more Jewish people attend a Seder on Pesach than attend synagogue services on Yom Kippur. So, very important moment in the Jewish calendar, and the story of the Seder, the story of Pesach, is, of course, the story of freedom. So, what does freedom mean? What is true freedom? Is true freedom simply the ability to do as you wish, or is there something deeper to freedom? That's what we're going to be discussing today. And to come to that conclusion, we'll be looking at different aspects of the story of Pesach, specifically the Paschal sacrifice that was brought. And from that, we will learn a lot about the freedom experience that every person hopefully finds on Pesach. As well, we're going to be trying something new. We're going to be incorporating a Stump the Rabbi moment at the end of each Mondays with Mendy session. So we've posted on Facebook and Twitter an open invitation for people to submit questions, comments, and I encourage you to all use that to ask anything you possibly want. You can post it anonymously, and we will hopefully answer some of those questions in our webinars, and maybe do one dedicated exclusively to that. So let's get started. There's a story told about a gentleman that comes over from Poland. And he comes to the United States, and in anticipation of his trip, he knows he won't be able to bring all of his belongings with him, won't be able to bring all of his wealth that he's amassed. So he does what any sensible person would do. He sells everything and buys gold with it, and then takes the gold and melts it down into 5 pairs of golden teeth. And he travels with them, and he finally gets off the boat at Ellis Island, and the gentleman there at the immigration desk says, well, what are these 5 golden teeth for? Because obviously he couldn't bring them in for commercial reasons. So he tells him, no, these are not to sell. These are my own teeth. This is what I use to eat. He says, okay, but why do you need 5 pairs? He says, let me explain to you. I am an Orthodox Jew, and therefore I don't eat milk and meat together. Not only I don't eat them together, I don't use the same teeth to eat them. So I have 1 pair for milk and 1 pair for meat. He says, okay, great, that's 2. What about the other 3? He says, well, Passover is a very important holiday, and on Passover we try not to eat any leavened products. And therefore, if my teeth might have had leavened products during the year, I can't use the same teeth. So again, I need another pair for meat and another pair for dairy. He says, great, that's 4 pairs, but why do you need 5 pairs of golden teeth? He says, listen, every once in a while, I like to have a ham and cheese sandwich. I don't want that to get influenced into my other pairs of teeth, so I have another pair just for that special time. Pesach is a very important holiday, and everybody celebrates it in different ways, but as I said, it's something that really brings everyone together. You go to the supermarkets, and you're going to find the shelves stocked with macaroons and matzah and wine and all kinds of different stuff that you don't see the rest of the year, because it is a holiday that really brings out the celebration in all of us. What is the most important part of the celebration of Pesach? What would you say is the greatest focal point of the holiday? Many people would say it's matzah. But in reality, if you really had to dilute it down to its absolute biblical celebration, it would be the eating of the Paschal sacrifice. That was the primary mode of celebration for the Jewish people, dating all the way back through temple times, even before temple times, when the Jewish people actually left Egypt. The Paschal sacrifice was the greatest demonstration. Before they had Seders, they had the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice. Of course, since then, we've turned that into rabbinic traditions of eating maror, bitter herbs. That was added as another form of celebration and reminder of the bitterness of the slavery. And today we have an entire Seder that has many, many different traditions. But in its origin, the eating of the Paschal sacrifice was the primary form of celebration for all of the Jewish people on Pesach. And we find in the Torah it says you should bring the sacrifice to the temple, and it was generally brought in groups. groups of at least 10, a minion. Interestingly enough, the Romans that were in charge of the land of Israel for a long time, hundreds of years, they used the Paschal sacrifice on Pesach as a form of census. They would take count of how many Jewish people were alive and under their rule by counting the amount of Paschal sacrifices that were brought. Josephus, who was a noted historian, writes that during the reign of Nero, he wanted to know how many people lived in the nation of Israel, so he instructed the priests to find out. What did the priests do? They found the number of sacrifices were 256,500, and they assumed that it was about 10 sacrifices, 10 people per sacrifice, so they came up to a calculation of 2,700,200 people. So everybody brought a Paschal sacrifice, and it was indeed, just like today, the unifying celebration of Pesach. But as I mentioned, the bringing of the Paschal sacrifice, roasting it on the open fire, and then everyone eating it together in a communal manner, that started back to the time of the actual leaving from Egypt. In Egypt, for 210 years, the Jewish people have been brutally oppressed. Brutally oppressed. Absolute slavery without any sense of freedom whatsoever. Finally, God says to the Jewish people that we're going to be leaving Egypt. They're not sure. He says, no, I'm serious. We're going to be leaving Egypt. Start preparing yourself. And say, okay, fine. Then we know the story of the 10 plagues. Pharaoh says, no, yes. Then he says, no, yes, no, yes, no, back and forth. Finally, after 10 plagues, he says, get out. I don't want you here anymore. I want you to leave. All right? He says, no, you got to leave tomorrow. I want you to leave right now. That's when I want you to leave. So Moses says, no, we're not leaving tonight. Tonight we're going to stay here. We're going to celebrate. We'll leave tomorrow in the morning. Fine. What does he instruct the Jewish people to do? He tells them, you're to take a lamb. And you're going to take the lamb and you're going to tie it to your bedpost for a couple days. Then afterwards, you're going to slaughter the lamb and you're going to put the blood on your doorposts so that you will survive the death of the firstborn, the 10th plague. And then you're going to eat the lamb together with your family. That is the first Paschal sacrifice. But it's very interesting. He tells them specifically, do not eat it roasted in a pot. Don't cook it. Don't boil it. Only roast it directly on a fire in its entirety. Now, I know it seems to be a moot point how they ate the sacrifice, but the beauty of Torah study, indeed, is the fact that every detail is valuable and teaches us a wealth of information. So what do we possibly glean and learn from the fact that everybody, in order to leave and go out to be free people, had to eat the Paschal sacrifice, roasted in its entirety on an open fire, rather than cooked or boiled, sautéed maybe, with some mushrooms and onions, right? Today, everyone makes their brisket a little different. You deep fry it, you don't do it, you do this, garlic, tomato sauce, whatever your particular preference is. Here, the Torah is so specific. It's very rare that you see that level of specificity when it comes to food. Typically, as long as it's kosher, it's fine. The Torah says, no, not in this case. In this case, you need to make sure that the food is roasted on an open fire, and this is the way to do it. Okay? And that's indeed the routine that's used from that point onward. Always that it should be roasted on an open fire. Until this very day, on the Seder plate, you will see, on the kara, you will see a little zroa, a little shank bone, reminiscent of that Paschal sacrifice. So why? What is so important about cooking the Paschal sacrifice specifically in this manner? I could give you one answer. But instead, I'm going to give you 5 different answers. 5 answers. Each one of these answers from a different noted scholar highlight a different angle of the Seder. The Seder experience is very powerful and very meaningful on many different levels. So through these 5 answers, you will see 5 different dimensions to the story of Pesach and why the Paschal sacrifice has to be eaten in exactly the manner that it is. We'll start with the first answer. The first answer comes from the Midrash. The Midrash says that you should eat the Paschal sacrifice roasted on a fire, similar, reminiscent to the fire that Abraham survived when he was thrown into a burning furnace. What is it referring to? Of course, we know the story of Abraham. Abraham is the first Jew. Abraham starts the entire story, the entire journey of the Jewish people, even before they were a Jewish people. The entire concept of monotheism is born from Abraham because Abraham recognizes God at a young age. He comes home to his father, Terach, who owns an idol shop, and he starts working in the shop. A woman comes in and says, I want to buy an idol, Abraham. Abraham says, okay, what are you going to do with the idol? And he starts telling the woman, listen, idols don't really do anything, and so on and so forth, and she leaves. Then he destroys all of the idols in the shop. His father comes home. Of course, he's very upset. He asks him, what happened? He says, don't get angry. A woman came. She wanted to buy an idol. She had some offerings, and the idols got into a fight. One idol started fighting with the other idol because he wanted more offerings and less offerings, and eventually they all killed each other, except this one big idol of Nimrod. Terach hears this, and he goes livid. He says, how can you say that Abraham idols don't talk, they don't walk, they don't eat? And Abraham turns to him and says, then why do you worship them? That's precisely the point. Why do you worship them? So eventually the news travels to the king Nimrod, and Nimrod says, you're not, who are you to go against these idols, these gods, lahavdil? And Abraham says there's only one true God. So Nimrod throws him into a burning, fiery furnace to demonstrate that he's a heretic. And of course, we know the story. Abraham is not burned. He comes out unscathed, and Nimrod accepts that the one true God is God. This is the story of Abraham. This is how he starts to spread the belief in monotheism and one true God throughout the entire world. It started with this episode. So on Pesach, we eat the Paschal sacrifice, roasted over an open fire, to remember how the whole journey started. How did the whole journey of the Jewish people start? How did it come about? It came about through a declaration, a statement. The Jewish people started with Abraham. Abraham says, I believe in one true God. That's it. Whether you say you like that or not, whether it's accepted by society or not, this is what I believe in. And based on that core belief, that core faith, the Jewish people are then formed, eventually going to Egypt and leaving Egypt. But it all starts with that declaration. So the first thing we remember on Pesach, by eating the Paschal sacrifice over an open fire, is this belief in God. Then we move along. The next answer that we provide comes from the Book of Education. And the Book of Education says, written many, many, many years ago, 500-600 years ago, the Book of Education says, why do we eat the Paschal sacrifice over an open fire? Completely different reason. This is the beauty of Jewish education. There's so many different perspectives. We eat it because that is the manner of royalty. On Pesach, on the Seder, of course, we know there's a tradition to have comfortable pillows, if possible, to drink the 4 cups of wine while reclining, all to highlight the fact that we are free people. We are like royalty, and royalty would often eat and drink while reclining. Many people ask, well, that doesn't seem very comfortable, but originally they didn't sit on chairs. Excuse me. They laid on couches, and therefore laying flat was a sign of royalty. Guess what? Roasting your food is also a sign of royalty. That's what the Book of Education says. Because if a poor person has a piece of meat, they want to preserve the entirety of the meat. So therefore they don't roast it, because roasting actually burns off parts of the fats. You get a smaller piece of meat. If you're wealthy, you can afford that. But if you're not, you would probably roast it in some liquids, etc. That's how you would cook your meat, so that you got every bit of it out of it as possible. So we roast it to show that we are free and royal, and therefore we can eat our meat even roasted. Another reason he highlights, so again, we see the concept of what does the Seder reinforce, this concept of freedom and royalty, that we are from a precious ilk of people with a rich heritage and a rich history, and that's why we eat it roasted. But he says another reason. Also, roasting is the fastest way to cook meat. Of course, if you braise it in liquid, it takes a long time. Even if you have a pressure cooker, God knows they didn't have one in Egypt, I imagine. But even if you've got a pressure cooker, it takes a while. If you roast it over an open flame, it's the fastest way. And that reminds us of the Jewish people leaving Egypt in great haste. Of course, we know the story of matzah. The Jewish people didn't have time to let the bread rise, and therefore it stayed flat while it baked in the heat of the sun, and therefore we eat matzah. Well, we eat the Paschal sacrifice roasted over an open flame to remind us of the same concept. It's not just about the fact that the Jewish people left in great haste. It's a reminder of the fact that they left without knowing where they were going. Again, another declaration of faith. Yes, they had seen 10 plagues take place in Egypt, but they didn't have a trajectory. They didn't have a destination. They didn't have time to ask Moses and get a consensus and prepare and plan. They had to leave right away. And they showed great faith by doing that. So far, we've got a few different explanations. We're moving along. The next explanation that is brought is by Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra. He says the following. He says that when the Jewish people were told to take the animal and bring it and kill the lamb and use it for this Paschal sacrifice, this meal that they were going to eat, it was the greatest declaration and statement of faith possible. Why? For a different reason. Because in Egypt, it was a god. The Egyptians worshipped the lamb. And so when the Jewish people took the lamb and tied it around their bedpost, which happened a couple days prior to them leaving Egypt, the Egyptians were curious. What's taking place? What's going on? And the Jewish people said, we are going to be leaving Egypt soon. And before we do, we're going to eat this lamb as our celebratory meal together with our families. This is what they were telling the Egyptians. And can you imagine? These are their captors. These are their taskmasters. They showed tremendous faith and courage in declaring what they were going to be doing openly to the Egyptian people. And of course, we know that Shabbat, that few days before, turned into a major civil war in Egypt. Because when the Jewish people told the Egyptians that in a little bit we're going to have the death of the firstborn, and then we are going to be leaving Egypt, and that's why we're using this Paschal sacrifice to put blood on the doorpost and as a celebratory meal, the Egyptians got nervous, many of them. They went running and said, Pharaoh, let them go. Pharaoh said no. They turned into a civil war in Egypt amongst those that said the Jewish people should leave and those that said the Jewish people should not leave. And many, many Egyptians were killed just in that experience. That's why the Shabbat before Pesach is called the Great Shabbat. So eventually, the Jewish people take the lamb, they kill the lamb, they take the blood, put it on the doorpost, and now it's time to eat. So you can cook lamb, you can cook your food in many different ways. But the most open demonstration of cooking is to cook it in its entirety on a spit, on an open flame. And that's what the Jewish people did. So again, it was a matter of showing to the Egyptians, look, we have taken what you think is a god, and it has become part of our process of freedom. We used it on our doorposts, and now we are eating it as our celebratory meal. This is our process of freedom. A huge, huge declaration and statement of faith. So far we see that all these different answers share one thing in common. They are all methods of declaration of Jewish people's faith in God. And that is the reminder of the Seder. Free people are able to believe the way they want to believe. They're able to profess that belief in whatever way they want. That is the major story of the Seder. But we're not done. We have another explanation, this one from the Maharal of Prague, the great Rabbi Yehuda Loewy, who notoriously made the Golem. And if you go to Prague till this very day, you can visit the Alten Shul, the old synagogue, which was his synagogue and has been preserved in its entirety. In any event, the Maharal says the following. He says that it's not just about a declaration of faith. It's more. Pesach is a celebration of unity. As I said, it is one holiday when everybody gathers together to celebrate the Seder. Whatever label you put on yourself, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Sephardic, Ashkenaz, you're culturally Jewish, Jewish at heart, you're Mizrahi, you're this, you're that. It doesn't matter. Most people find a Seder to partake in. So this is highlighted by roasting the Paschal sacrifice. Why? When you braise it in water, when you cook it, then everything that's around it gets absorbed into it. It gets absorbed into it. And the meat mixes with all the different items. It becomes one mishkababel, as you would, right? The braising liquid gets a little bit of the meat gets a little of the liquid. There could be other items inside of the pot together with the meat. Everything gets mixed together. On Pesach, that's not what happens. On Pesach, the Jewish people are defining who they are as one united people. So therefore, when you roast it over an open fire, all of the liquid actually pours out. The meat shrinks and hardens. It's the concept of the meat, the Jewish people, coming together in one unifying factor. And that's what takes place on the Pesach. Even though the Jewish people mix with all the other nations of the world, and they get along with all the other nations, and they're a light unto all the nations, at the end of the day, they possess a unique identity, a unique cohesion and camaraderie, and that is highlighted on the night of the Seder by the fact that it's roasted over an open flame, which causes the meat to contract and to push away any foreign object. Unity in the face of diversity. The world has multiplicity. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of billions of things exist in the world. So on the Seder night, we push away all of the foreign objects and focus on our identity as a people. Beautiful. So we have multiple explanations on why the Paschal sacrifice is cooked over an open fire. And each one highlights a declaration of freedom, a declaration of faith, a statement to our history as a people, our origin with Abraham and the fire, or it has to do with us becoming unified as one group and sort of our own existence. All these things make wonderful, wonderful sense. But there's one reason that reaches the absolute core of the Seder experience, of the freedom journey. When you cook, you can do it with fire or you can do it with water. Fire or water. What is the difference between fire and water? It's not just the fact that one is cold and one is hot, but rather there is a core underlying difference between fire and water. Water cools down. Water settles things, right? It becomes stable. Fire is never stable. Fire is constantly yearning to move higher. It pushes against the laws of nature and physics, always striving to go upwards. That is a unique quality of fire. Relative to water, fire is restless. It's passionate. There's tension. Water is at peace. It's calm. Two completely different and opposing ideas. So when you cook the Paschal sacrifice in fire and not in water, what you are saying is that the journey to freedom as Jewish people and as human beings is about fire. It's about passion. It's about constantly striving for more, to be more, to reach for more. That's what makes a human being a human being. So the story of freedom, the journey of the Exodus of Egypt, is not a journey that happened thousands of years ago. It's a journey happening today. And when you burn the Paschal sacrifice over fire, what you are saying is, I am like the fire, constantly striving to become more free. Because every person has self-imposed limitations that say, I can do this, I can't do that. I can do that, but that I can't do. Whether it's in our personal life or our professional life, we are constantly limiting ourselves. So when you light that fire and you roast the sacrifice, what you are saying is, I am like the fire, constantly pushing beyond my limitations, constantly exploring other possibilities, dreaming for something greater. That's what fire does, and that's the human condition. The moment that you stop trying for more, you start dying. You become stagnant and stationary, and that's not growth. That's not life. The human condition requires us to constantly push beyond the status quo. That's why we celebrate fire on the night of the Seder and not water. Because the journey of freedom is ongoing. Every day, every year, every moment is a journey towards greater freedom and greater freedom. And the freedom of last year is not the freedom of today. So last year you left Egypt, you got to do the Seder over again because you've got to leave Egypt even more this year. When a human being stops wanting to achieve more, to create more, to become more, they stop existing. They stop existing. There was a story once about a great rabbi who was sitting in a study, and one of his disciples comes in and notices that the rabbi is erasing some writings that he had. The student turns to the rabbi, who was the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. He says, Rebbe, I don't understand. Why are you erasing what you wrote? I'm sure it was very powerful stuff. Such a scholar like you, why would you erase that? The Rebbe said, yes, it was powerful. It was enlightening at the time. But relative to where I am today, it is a darkened piece of work. Every human being, when they set the goal of constant growth, they will find that where they were yesterday is no longer good enough. It's not good enough for today. Today, I must accomplish even more. I must push beyond the goals that I set for yesterday. That is the story of the Seder. Yes, it's a declaration of faith. Yes, it's a reminder of our royalty status. Yes, it's a reminder of the fact that the Jewish people had great belief in God and that they had to leave in great haste. All of those things. But what is it designed to do? It's designed to propel you forward, to push you off to the next level of life. Because without that, you stop living. So when you sit down to the Seder this year, and everyone I hope has a Seder. If you don't, please join us at our Seder under the stars, a magical journey outdoors. It's going to be absolutely lovely. You can get the information on our website at chabadsouthampa.com. At the Seder, challenge yourself to find your point of freedom, your moment of liberation from tyranny, from limitation to absolute freedom. And I hope that you will have a wonderful, happy, healthy, and kosher Passover. One that's more meaningful because you are finding greater freedom today than you did last year. As always, you can email or ask us any questions via askmendy@gmail.com. As I said, we're going to be responding to some questions that have come in during our conversation today. We have a question from, let's see here. We have a question from Diana, who asks, Diana from St. Petersburg asks, if God is just, how come he allows for injustice and human suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? That is a great question. And to give an answer in 30 seconds, we don't know and understand the injustice that happens to other people. It's part of what we don't understand about life. Unfortunately, we have a very limited view into the world. We only see what happens in our life. We don't see what happens before. We definitely don't know what happens after. As a result, we really can't make a judgment call as to what is good and what is bad. We do know what is painful and what is pleasurable, and that's why when we pray that we should have a pleasurable life for us, for our friends, and for our family, and for all of the people of the world. But we don't know what is technically good or bad because we haven't seen the totality of the story. We don't see what happens after our life here on earth. We only see from a very limited view, and therefore it's hard to make a judgment call without seeing the full context. And Vicky asks, what happens when we die? Are we reincarnated to learn things we didn't learn this time around? Is there an afterlife or is there just nothing? Great question, Vicky. We do believe in an afterlife. We do believe in a heaven, a spiritual existence, and the spiritual part of our existence here on earth, our soul, continues to live on after life. There is such a concept as reincarnation, and reincarnation is a spiritual concept. So certain parts of our soul don't fulfill their entire destiny, so to speak, while they're here on life. And therefore, it's almost like a new part of the soul is born and comes back into an existence here on earth. It's like a candle. A candle can give birth to other candles, and now where you had one light, you have 2 lights, and 3 lights, and 4 lights, and so on and so forth. Same too, the soul as a spiritual energy can become 2 souls and impart itself into another soul, and then that soul can come down into a body to complete its destiny, which oftentimes happens. So you, as you will not come back in reincarnation. You live your life, and then you go to the afterlife. But you may get a sense of a previous life because a part of your soul became, or a part of your soul was part of another soul, and eventually it became its own identity. Similar to one candle becoming 2. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you'll find all you need for the Seder. If you need anything, please let us know. Next week, we'll talk about Jewish leadership, lessons that we learn from Caesar. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone.